All right. Welcome to the Measure Up podcast, Mike Taylor.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, pretty happy. It's sunny today in the UK for once, so so everyone's in a
Ah,
good mood.
yeah, we got the clouds here in Pittsburgh. It's 35 degrees this morning and snowing, and tomorrow it's supposed to be 70. So, welcome,
There you
welcome
go.
to spring.
Yeah, it's not
Cool.
global warming; it's global variability.
Exactly. Yes. Awesome. So Mike, a quick intro. Let me see from my notes here. So, you got a bachelor's in, was it business administration, and the
Yeah,
master's in
I did
economics?
business. That was actually the only degree that let me in. I wasn't much of an academic early on. I thought my band was going to make it. I was touring with a rock band,
No way.
so I used to be cool. And then eventually, wisened up and started to study economics, and kind of get into then kind of leapt into marketing from there.
Fantastic. So wait, what type of band? What kind of music?
Yeah, I would describe us as kind of like U2 meets the Foo Fighters.
Nice, nice. I could dig
Yeah,
that. Are there
yeah,
some
yeah.
music on Spotify?
No, thank God.
No,
It wasn't great.
it was too early for Spotify. Damn.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
let me guess. I'm gonna say not drums, not bass. I'm saying lead guitar,
Oh no, no bass. I'm a
bass.
bassist.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
bass.
yeah, yeah. But
Cool.
actually, my most important role was band manager and
Nice.
promoter. So, because bass isn't, a real instrument, so my friends would say.
Right. Right. Yeah. But you get your marketing chops early on, promoting
Exactly.
and
Yeah, I didn't know
yeah,
it back then, but it became useful.
fantastic. So yeah, bachelor's in business administration, master's in economics. It's always fun listening to the stories of how people got into kind of the area that we're in, data analytics, marketing, digital
Yeah.
marketing. It's funny because like up to this point, like everyone's journey is like esoteric and like I got my degree in photojournalism and commercial art, which
Oh
was
wow. Yeah.
really helpful for analytics. But like everyone is like of a certain age has a weird, interesting story of how they got to it. But now I feel like it's probably going to become a little bit more homogenous and maybe a little less
Oh yeah.
interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows though? Like, if I'm sure my kids will be like prompt engineers one day. Working with
Yeah.
AI. I don't know. Yeah, I
We're
don't. The,
probably
the thing is, there's no real manual for this type of career, right? You don't grow up in class like dreaming of being a marketer or whatever. I don't know.
right. Yeah, and like it's so exciting and terrifying to think like what will our kids be doing because the pace of change with everything around GPT and LLMs and it's hard to even imagine what's going to be there in 10, 20 years. So like I don't know to be terrified or excited or both, but it'll be
That's
fun to
a
watch.
problem to deal with.
Yeah,
We had our own
yeah,
issues.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, so from economics, masters in economics, did you start ladder right after that?
No, so I went from my master's degree into a company called Efficient Frontier, which was basically like a algorithmic bidding technology for Google Ads. They actually got bought by Adobe, so now they're called like the Adobe Media Optimizer. So I kind of cut my teeth. Like my first real job in marketing was like at a startup that got bought by Adobe, which was pretty cool. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I made like $8,000 in stock options at the time, which was huge. That was like that paid off my overdraft and gave me some savings for once. So yeah, that was a big move, and then kind of jump from startup to startup after that, and then started Ladder after I left ShopStyle.
Okay. Yeah. So ladder, growth marketing agency, growth hacking agency, back when
Yeah,
that term
yeah, back
was
when that was
really
cool.
cool. And yeah,
Yeah.
grew it to like 50 plus people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. They're still going actually. I think I was just talking to John, my co-founder. He still runs it as the CEO. So they're I think past 60 people now, which is pretty cool.
nice. That's a great size too. Like for me, like I love the like 50 people, maybe 50 or less, like somewhere between like 30 and 50 people companies. You get
Yeah,
great, people working together. Like everyone's really like, you don't get lost in the sea of like thousands of colleagues and like people sliding under the radar and
Oh yeah, so
uh
so for me, I'm allergic to even 50. Like my happy days were when we were like 14 people, or even like
yeah,
6 or 7 people, and we're just like all hacking away in a room together.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm very similar. Like I started my journey down this path with a company called Lunametrics when it
Okay, yeah,
was
heard of it.
I was number 5. um, and then kind of left and came back and have been there ever since. And now, Lunametrics was acquired, and a bunch of other companies were acquired, and now it's Bounteous, and it's like 17 or 1800 people, and it's definitely a different feel, different vibe, but still
Yep,
good. But yeah, I love the small company feel. But not about me. This is more about you. So yeah, Ladder super successful. Feels like that was like a really good fertile training ground for a lot of the stuff that you've been doing since. Experimentation and
100%. Yeah,
memetics and the playbooks and all of that kind of stuff that came out of that and has really kind of
yeah. I
fueled
mean,
you
you,
from
you
there.
just can't like work 60, 70, 80 hours a week for 6 years and not like learn a bunch, right?
Yeah.
Like we worked with 200 different startups over that time. Also, some big companies as well. So we work with Booking.com. We actually worked. I ran some Facebook ads for Facebook when they were launching the workplace products. That was pretty fun. So yeah, we got to do a whole bunch of random things that I never otherwise would have been able to. If I had gone into one of these companies as an employee. But as an agency, I think the barriers are lower and they're much more willing to work with anyone who can solve a problem for them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the fun times, right? When you can, you're the expert, and they listen to you, and you don't have to go through 10 layers of red tape, and you
Yeah.
can kind of
Oh,
move
there's still
quick
red tape,
and
of course, but
oh yeah,
at least you get paid for navigating it.
exactly. Yeah. So from ladder, is saxifrage the next thing?
Yeah, so that's it's actually kind of like a silly name that I made up. It's not really like a company necessarily. It's just me, right? So it's my
Right. Right.
consulting, single person LLC. So the name actually comes from, it's like really geeky. It comes from Kim Stanley Robinson book, the Mars trilogy. And Saxifrage is the name of this mad scientist on Mars, one of the first 100 colonizers. So
Nice.
yeah, that's where I got the name from because I just had to choose a name, and then I didn't really think it would be like a like a front facing name, but I kind of it grew on me over time, and I needed some sort of domain name for my consulting website. So here we are.
Awesome. Yeah. And it was available. So there it is. uh,
Yeah.
cool. And so that's kind of the consulting side of it. Still doing some consulting, and then the things that are probably more interesting and exciting for you would be Vexpower and of course the Memetics marketing marketing Memetics.
Yeah, I
So
know. I need to think
Vexpower,
about that title. Actually, it's a bit of a tongue twister.
right?
But yeah, so when I left Ladder, I kind of I started consulting because obviously I had a bunch of knowledge, like wanted to use it for something, and wanted to pay the mortgage while I figured out what I wanted to do. And yeah, I'm kind of lucky to have just a handful now of like really easy to work with and also like intellectually stimulating clients because it's just me. I don't have to support a whole payroll anymore,
Right.
so I can kind of pick and choose, which is nice. But yeah, then that's kind of bought me the time to work on two other big projects. Like one is Vexpower, which is the online learning platform. I work with one other guy in that, a guy called James Phoenix, who's a better developer than me, and we basically just teach data driven marketing. So things like marketing mix modeling, that was our first course, and then kind of branched out from there. And now we're doing a bunch of AI prompt engineering courses, things like that. And then the other big monkey I wanted to get off my back was this book called Marketing Memetics, and it's really the field guide, kind of like the instruction booklet that I wish existed when I was running the agency, because we were always in this situation where we were all very data driven people, but then we found that it was actually like creative that drives most success. right? So creative testing, like coming up with good creative ideas. So we were kind of floundering for a long time trying to figure this out because we were uncomfortable in those like branding conversations. So this book is really kind of like that framework that I developed during the agency, where I could just like hand it to someone who's data driven and say like, this is how you do brand, right? Like this is how you do creative. It's how you come up with good creative ideas. It's not. It doesn't have to be a big scary fluffy black box. Like it's actually something that's pretty can be pretty rigorous if you just kind of know the right things.
Yeah, yeah, I want to come back to like exploring memetics as a whole and like kind of explaining that. But one thing that you mentioned was sort of the power of creative and creative testing.
Mm.
And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Do you think what's the breakdown between marketers and marketing analysts who are running tests on their marketing from a like a holdout test or geolift experiments
Hmm.
versus doing actual creative testing?
Yeah, good question. So I would say prior to iOS 14, most marketers, or at least most of the ones I knew, were like focused on optimizations, right? So they would put some creative out there, they would test it every now and again, but a lot of what they were doing was like moving budget around or kind of like changing their Google bids, right? That's actually what the technology did that I worked at in the first company, Efficient Frontier, and over time, what's happened is a lot of that stuff has been automated, right? Or it's gotten like so complex that you have to kind of be an expert in it, right? So I think the whole industry is kind of bifurcated. Either you go full on creative, and the way that you move the needle is just find the next kind of creative win, or you go the other direction and get really good at measurement and data, so you can do more advanced stuff. So not just like doing a pivot table in Excel, but like actually like building a marketing mix model, or doing a geolift experiment. And most people don't do both of those things. I'm a little bit weird in that I did because those were like my two passions from leaving Ladder, like creative testing on the extreme end, and then on the other end, this like getting really good at measurement. I kind of call it like a barbell strategy, right? Like nothing in the middle, like everything on either extreme end.
Nice, I love that the analogy. Yeah, I've always been on the right side of the barbell with the measurement and data.
Mm,
And recently, over the last few months, maybe a year, I started to think a little bit more on the creative side, right? And it's
yeah,
a few people have kind of brought this to attention through newsletters or LinkedIn or Twitter. Like Avnish Kaushik is one who talks about like the power of creative. It's like that's actually like
yeah,
60% of what drives the performance. And it
yeah,
just it kind of occurred to me, it's like we're spending, me personally and a lot of other people like me spend so much time, doing the optimizations, you know, budget maximizations and everything else and bid strategies and all that kind of stuff, building marketing mix models where like you get more juice for the squeeze on the creative side potentially.
yeah.
Right. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah, yeah. Like
interesting.
I always say, like either you can measure what performed, or you can make it perform better. You know,
Right. Right.
and creative is how you make it perform better. So like, I mean, I think I was kind of fortuitous in that I came into marketing from economics, right? So for me, like I was going from like I couldn't get into finance, right? I graduated during the 2008 recession, right?
Oh no.
Lucky me, right?
Yeah.
2009. So I applied for over 100 jobs, didn't get anything. I even a lot of my friends worked in the government at the time as economists, and I couldn't even get in there because the bar was a little bit lower than finance, but because all the finance people couldn't get jobs, they all went into, so like he had like the top 1% of all the graduates that year all like applied for the government, right? So like I was definitely not in the anywhere near the top 1% in my class, and my class itself wasn't in the top 10%. So yeah, so I kind of came into marketing and kind of saw it as like low hanging fruit, right? Uh, if you're mathematical, you tend to work on things that are easy to measure, because that's where you feel like you'll have the most impact, and it kind of feels, I guess, you know, immediately useful, right? if you can, if you can do math, then you can work in finance, right? And then you can make a lot of money. But I think like where actually most of the value is added is to take someone who's good at data and then drop them into like basically an area where nobody uses data. And marketing is that, right? Like I mean, it's become more and more fashionable, I think, to use data in marketing, but still, like, if you're a data driven marketer, you're still like a pretty rare breed. Like the vast majority who work in marketing, work in marketing because they want to make a nice looking TV ad, right? Or because they're an artist, and like advertising is like one of the few ways to fund, like one of the few types of organization that will like pay you to do art, right?
Yeah.
So like that's still like if you take like 100 decisions in marketing, I'd say probably like 99.999% of them are opinion driven, right? They're not data driven. So if you can even be like 10% better, you don't actually have to be very good at math to make a big impact, and to I guess like kind of get those choice jobs amongst like other people who like have never opened Excel, things like that. So for me, I kind of came into marketing with that, that kind of wind in my sails. And then I've kind of benefited from, even despite not being like a very I wasn't ever very good at economics, right? But like I was good enough I was like better than the other people in marketing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of nice. And I kind of have continued that, right? So like, I've gone, at first I was like afraid of creative because it's so like difficult, like it's very hard to use data, it's very hard to test, and very hard to really understand like such a dynamic system, and why people buy things, why they don't. So for me, that was just kind of a continuation. It's like the next big challenge. Like if I can get even kind of applied data to creative, then there's a huge upside that like almost nobody else who works in data is even attempting.
Yeah. And so, what would be like your top one or two ways that you would apply data to creative? Would it be on the testing side or the generation side? Like, are you using data to create the ideas and then using testing to test out the creatives?
Yeah, good question. So I would say like the biggest, most impactful thing that I've kind of like given a name as part of writing the book is I call it meme mapping. But actually, like everywhere I look, I see people doing this. Like a lot of people are really good at their craft. They obviously don't call it meme mapping like I do, but I've just kind of tried to brand it. But a really good example is James Clear. Like he wrote Atomic Habits. If you know that book, so
Yeah.
New
Oh
York
yeah.
Times bestseller, like really useful book. But there's actually like there are actually quite a few other books that are similar to his that quote the same research on habit formation, right? That didn't do anywhere near as good a job of marketing themselves. And one of the things that he did, which is pretty interesting, was like what I call meme mapping. He basically compiled a list of the 100 best-selling business books that sold like more than $1 million worth of copies. And then he looked at the titles and kind of found the patterns in the titles. So like, what are the kind of repetitive kind of things that people tend to use in the titles? Like, what are the and one of the patterns that he found was this idea of like taking the topic of the book, and then using a word that's not normally paired with the topic. So he kind of found that in the data. It's not like a rigorous analysis, right? But like the alternative is using no data, right? And just using your gut. But like by kind of looking at 100 examples of success, he was able to kind of build a more informed opinion. So his title became Atomic Habits, right? Habits are not normally described as atomic, right? So I think like that's part of how he was successful with that title. And he did that actually in a couple of other ways as well. Like he actually looked at like the table of contents and like how many chapters do they normally in successful books, like kind of copying those repetitive patterns is like I think like a really easy win. And especially when you're doing something that important, like it takes a long time to write a book, and most people just go with their gut when they when they come up with the title. Like I did hilariously, which is why I'm like we talked about marketing memetics doesn't really roll off the tongue, but that was actually just intended to be just a placeholder. initially. But now I'm getting close to launch. I'm actually going to kind of do this meme mapping process and then start testing different titles because I'd kind of look like a fool if I didn't, right?
Right. Well, I mean, it has the alliteration. I'm sure that's probably one of the signals of good
That
titles,
helps. Yeah,
alliteration
I think
and
that helps. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, the book marketing memetics or TBD, whatever
Yeah,
the
yeah,
title will
yeah.
be. Um, let's talk a little bit about that. I've been following your journey. You've been sort of writing in public, and it's been great to see like your uh, you're always I feel like you're doing so much, and I'm always seeing you posting on LinkedIn and Twitter, and like it's like every day there's a new chapter and a new essay. Um, and I've been kind of following along, but admittedly, like I haven't gotten it. Like, and maybe my brain is stuck in sort of the the meme culture of the internet, and I think of memes, and
Yep.
I think of what most people think of memes. And so
Sure.
I think I finally had sort of a breakthrough with understanding kind of where you're coming from with memetics.
Mm.
As I was listening to some of your previous podcasts, and it's tell me if I'm thinking about this right. It's basically just looking at patterns and how things how things are working, right? And trying to understand the
Exactly. Yeah,
patterns
yeah.
of things and apply them to your own work.
Yeah, exactly. I think the name puts people off, but actually the word meme predates the internet. Like it doesn't mean internet memes, although they are like a good example of memes. It was like Richard Dawkins who coined the term in The Selfish Gene, which is a great book. It turned me on to like a lot of interesting ideas, but like one of the ideas he came up with in the book was that like it's not just DNA that replicates, right? Like it's not just our genes that evolve. Evolution also happens with our ideas. Every kind of piece of cultural information that we have that means something to us gets copied down, over time. It mutates either like genes do randomly, and sometimes those happy accidents become really big, or you can actually kind of purposefully alter them with human creativity, right? So the example I always use to kind of help people get conceptually what memes are is like if you go into a coffee shop, right? Um, you know whether it's like Starbucks or whether it's a hipster coffee shop, just purely based on like the visual components of what's in that store, right? So if there's like coffee, like if they have those like Hessian sacks the coffee beans come in, if you have like those on the wall, right, or if you have like the hanging Edison light bulbs. Or like reclaimed wood furniture, it's probably like a hipster coffee shop, right? And you know what to expect from that coffee shop based on those memes. Like, Starbucks, it's invested a lot in its logo. The logo is one of the memes, right? That helps you identify Starbucks. But they also are very purposeful about the type of furniture they buy, how things are painted, right? Like where things are situated. So all of those things are mental shortcuts that over time we built up these associations and kind of understand. We can kind of reason about whether we want to go to Starbucks or whether we want like a hipster coffee, using those memes, and they tend to converge over time on the most useful patterns because you can actually go to like I'm in England. I can go to a coffee shop that's around the corner that looks just like I'm in New York, just because they've copied the memes, of the successful hipster coffee places in Brooklyn, right? Those have gone global. You can go to Bangkok and find the same thing, and it's because they found that like those sorts of memes attract to a certain type of customer that they want, and it kind of sets that sort of vibe. So they don't think about it in terms of memetics, like just like James Clear wouldn't use the word memetics necessarily, but like that's what they're really doing is they're kind of choosing what to copy in order to convey a certain kind of sense or vibe of information.
Right. Yeah. It's branding, right? It's branding is memetics. It's
Yeah,
what do I want my
exactly. Yeah.
customers to feel? Who's my target audience? Who am I trying to attract? And what will they like? And yeah, keeping that
Yeah, and it's
consistency.
but it's
And
not just like it's not just for marketing, right? Like there's like couples, make up their own memes, right? Like me and my wife have like certain words that like I don't know, like we repeat that we hear like my daughter say, right? Like, and she'll say something funny and we'll keep repeating it, right? And they'll become like and then we'll like WhatsApp each other, these memes, right? Like humans are master replicators. Like the way we became successful as a species is because we're so good at copying from each other, imitating each other. So it means that like the very best ideas that we have disseminate and kind of persist over time. And we abandon, because there's only so much space in your head, we abandon all the things that didn't work, right? So this is like a constant evolution. I think it's wider than marketing, but as a marketer, like being in the business of trying to convince someone to do something means that like it's actually very very useful to have this more scientific framework, this kind of more data driven framework, like something you can actually do, like research you can actually do to help guide like what is the next ad that we're going to come up with. Are we going to put like how are we going to decorate our coffee shop, like how are we going to like what should we have on our landing page that conveys that we're trustworthy. All of these things are useful.
Yeah. One question that kind of comes to mind is, if humans are just replicating and remixing and kind of following patterns that have come before, do you think there are any original ideas out there, or is everything just a
Yeah.
remix?
Yeah, do you know what? Like that, it's a really interesting question because uh, I used to think that like some things were copied, but like most things are original. And I think most people think that most things are original because we don't really think about it. And there's actually like a societal taboo against copying, right? Like we have copyright infringement, for a reason. But also like in school, we're taught that we're not supposed to copy each other's answers, right? Um, and actually, if you copy someone's fashion choices exactly, they would be like, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you dressing like me?" Right? Like we have some aversion culturally to copying, but ironically, like almost nothing we do is original. And I've been extremely red pilled on that concept since reading the book because you start to see these recurring patterns everywhere, and kind of read from people who've studied them or kind of identified them, and it's like unbelievably crazy, like all the different things that you think are original, or like you think like people who are innovative, they're actually just copying from a source that you don't know. Right? So like I'll give you a couple of my favorite examples. Um, so Iron Man, in Batman, right? Like you think there are kind of some similarities, right? Like like we're both billionaires, they're both vigilantes, they're both orphans, right? And that kind of trope of like a billionaire vigilante orphan it dates way back, actually. But like one thing I found out is that Marvel Comics literally like invented Iron Man as the West Coast Batman because they had seen the success of Batman for DC Comics and said, we need our own version of Batman. So like
Just slightly
like
less
it's
dark
pretty
and
nuts.
brooding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's California Batman, right?
Yeah,
So like that's a crazy one. Another
that's
one
fun.
was like the iPhone, right? So prior to the iPhone coming into existence, there was a company called General Magic in Silicon Valley, and they ultimately failed. But like if you look up the patents, like if you search for like General Magic smartphone, you'll see it's basically an iPhone. And guess who was an intern at General Magic? Tony Fadell, who was one of the 8 people on the iPhone project at Apple, right? So like it's not original, right? Like I
Right.
mean, Steve Jobs did an incredible job of like bringing it into the world and kind of making it successful, but the ideas themselves are pretty widely copied. So
Yeah.
and you see that everywhere once you look for it.
Yeah. So maybe originality is overrated. It's more about how can you do something in a way that's not directly copying, kind of put your own twist on it, like, West Coast Batman.
Exactly, yeah,
But,
because there's a lot of cool stuff about Iron Man, but again, it's not like the cool stuff about Iron Man also is not original. It's just copied from other sources. It's the kind of combination that's original,
yeah.
and I think that if one of the motivations for writing this book was to really just kind of show everyone how unoriginal everything is. If we can kind of get past that, then actually frees you up to be more creative because you realize that all the people you think of as being creative geniuses are really just like flagrant copyright abusers, but they're just like willing to copy from more interesting sources and combine them in different ways, and they found a combination that works. And I think that's a really big mental unlock. Like once you see that, then you're like, oh, okay, like I don't actually have to start from a blank page. I can kind of copy something that I like, and then just kind of make it my own and copy it well, in a way that's like an homage to the original, but it still like kind of accomplishes something different.
Right. All right. So maybe kind of segueing into a slightly related topic, right? We're
Yeah.
talking kind of about memetics in general and copying what works.
Yep.
On the marketing side, because
Mm-hmm.
we're
Yeah. So more
a
on
lot
the
of us are
attribution
marketers.
side, like the measurement side.
Yeah, yeah. So as we're putting out these new ads and creatives, and trying to measure what's working and what it's not, a lot of disruption in the past few years with privacy regulations, GDPR, CCPA. I think every week is a new state launching a new regulation.
Yep.
With Apple kind of throwing their wrenches into the works with ITP and ATT and all of the other fun acronyms. What do you tell marketers? Like, or what would you advise marketers who are saying, okay, like they're throwing their hands up in the air and like we've been doing this user level tracking for the past 10 years. Now, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, this is the other big passion of mine over the past year or so, and I kind of got into this because I was when I left Ladder, like the very first idea I worked on was actually like a virality tracking tool. So think Google Analytics, but for social sharing, right? And I realized that it was not going to work. It was like the single worst time in history for creating such a tool because like Apple had started limiting cookies on using ITP like in Safari. So there's like this really big hole that Apple had punched through my idea, right? And so that kind of made me really interested in like, okay, so like if this continues and like there were already talks at the time about Google deprecating cookies one day, and like iOS 14 hadn't happened yet, but it was kind of inevitable that something would happen. So I started to look at like how did people measure before we had the internet, right? Because we still spent 1% of our GDP on advertising. That actually hasn't really changed in the past 100 years. It's always 1% of GDP. So like we had to measure it somehow, right? Like it's not we're not running charities, right? Like so I looked into it, and there were two main methods, or I guess three methods. So one was surveys, right? Like that started in I think the 1800s or earlier in London society. Like they started polling people to find like what brands they knew about, things like that. And that still continues today, obviously. And there are positives and negatives with those methods. There was actual kind of randomized control trials. So, turn off advertising in certain locations and then see the difference between the locations that had advertising and those that didn't. And then there was marketing mix modeling. So, it used to be called econometrics, but I think MMM is now like the preferred term. But yeah, this building a statistical model of all the different things you did in marketing in an attempt to kind of figure out what were the spikes and dips caused by. So I kind of looked into those methods, realized that we're going to have to like learn how to do them. I realized actually that all of the really big brands were doing them. And it was just us, startups and small businesses that didn't have the time or the money to do them. But like what we've seen over the past couple of years since iOS 14, I think has been like a real concerted effort by the industry to dig up and unearth those old techniques and make them more modern, right? And like use modern data science techniques so that you can have like a data pipeline that automatically builds the model every week or every 2 weeks, things like that. So I think there's a lot of like really interesting work going on, and marketers are kind of stitching these methods together, so that we're kind of actually ended up in a better place than we were before. Which sounds hard to believe, but measurement wasn't actually better before iOS 14. It was just like easier, right?
Yeah.
We were still dealing with a lot of problems. Like last click attribution was still, a real mess, right? Like, it was definitely over attributing some channels and not others. The good thing about these other methods is they're independent of the channel, and they can give you more of a closer vision of like what true incrementality is. Like if we turned off ads, how much money would you lose tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like marketers over the past decade have sort of been lulled into this false comfort of, thinking that they're tracking everything and they have all of the data about all of the users, and it's we just look at the dashboards and tell us how our marketing is performing, and that's truth. And of course, that's never been the case. It's just sort of
Yeah.
been this kind of everyone kind of drank the Kool-Aid and said, okay, yeah, the Google Analytics is telling us this. Oh, and they gave us this fancy multi-channel funnels, and we can change the models to linear time decay, which of course now we can't because they took it away, which
Yeah, they
I
just took
think
that
is
away.
a
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, there's
which
a
is
reason why Google Analytics is free, right? Like,
yeah,
it's has always prioritized last click channels, right? Like Google Ads, for example, right?
yeah,
And I think just in general, like if you believe what's happening in Google Analytics, then you're going to pump more money into Google Ads. So that's good for Google, and it's not like some vast conspiracy, right? Like this is pretty objectively the mission statement, right?
exactly,
But that's fine, right? Because other companies do the same thing. And I think that ultimately the lesson or the takeaway, at least over the past couple of years, for most of the marketers I talk to, is just like you just can't trust a platform to grade their own homework. Right. You,
exactly.
you really need, like, it's actually on you. If they trick you into spending more money with them, and it's not incremental, that's on you, right? Like your job is to be independent from that platform and kind of understand their incentives, and they're actually pretty honest, right? Like in general, more honest than they need to be. They could probably get away with a lot worse. But that means that you really need to have your own kind of independent methods for verifying what you're seeing in those reports.
Yeah, and starting to become comfortable with uncertainty, right? With
Yes, yeah,
everyone, especially digital marketers, I feel kind of maybe fall into this trap, myself included, is that we've thought we were certain about things for so long, and now we have to realize that there was never certainty, and we have to be okay
yeah,
with that, and understand that uncertainty is okay. We can reduce that uncertainty, at a cost.
yeah.
And we just have to find out, okay, what are the things that I'm most uncertain about that would be the most valuable to reduce that uncertainty? And it gets back to randomized controlled trials and marketing mix modeling, where it's a correlation. It's not telling you this is exactly what caused this, but it's kind of giving you better guidance than your gut, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like actually, like, so I do a bunch of work with Recast, the marketing mix modeling tool that you're also familiar with. But they, Mike Kaminsky there, he always says it's better to be uncertain and right than certain and wrong.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. I love that. Oh, I'm going to steal that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very
no, I
cool.
say it to everyone. But yeah, I mean, like I think it is really about basically. I'm a little bit less pithy, but I just say like essentially you just have to try and be less stupid, right?
Yeah,
There are some things that you can do that are really stupid, and there's some things you can do that are only kind of marginally stupid, and there's some things that you can do that nobody knows whether they're stupid or not yet. And I would say like even just avoiding the really stupid things puts you in the top 90% of marketers.
right, right. And then having the humility to admit that, like, listen, I don't know. I'm going to try and make smart decisions, but I'm probably going to be wrong. And let's test some things out and find out.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, I think that in marketing, there's a shortage of like executives who understand marketing, and like a lot of the executives I talk to have these kind of myths that are circulating in their heads, right? So they'll think, for example, that you can just like double your marketing budget and get double the sales, right? Which never works. Like you're
I,
lucky to get like half the incremental sales that if you double your budget, just because you're already kind of tapping all the low hanging fruit. You're already optimizing to like the cheapest people to buy. So if you have to double your budget, you have to buy more expensive media, right?
yeah,
So like there's myths like that I think are really harmful. to the marketing profession in general. I think it's one of the reasons why the marketing role, like the CMO role, is the shortest tenure in the C-suite. But I think it's also our fault, right? Like, I think a lot of marketers aren't very comfortable with uncertainty. They're not even comfortable like measuring uncertainty in the first place, right? Or like using data. And a lot of the marketers I talk to, especially the traditional ones, have certain things that they just like take for granted, and they just say like, no, we can't do that because it will hurt the brand. And you're like, okay, but like, how much will it hurt the brand? Is it going to be like 10%, 1%, 90%? Yeah, because depending on how much it's going to hurt the brand, it might actually still be worth doing, right? If it's going to make like I'll take a 1% hit to the brand for like 100% increase in revenue, right?
Yeah,
In some
yeah,
cases, right? I think it's about getting people to quantify and be comfortable with quantifying the risks versus the rewards.
exactly. Yeah, there's a cost. Like going back to what I said earlier, there's a cost to reducing uncertainty, and it's funny. Companies will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on analytics tools and platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Ostensibly, you're thinking they want to gain better understanding of what's happening, and they value that knowledge. But then when you propose to them a simple test where maybe you turn off a certain portion of ads to
Mm.
understand knowledge to get answers, there's like, well, oh no, we might lose sales. I'm just like, okay, that's a risk, and there would be a cost associated with that.
Yeah.
But you're also paying hundreds of thousands of dollars over here. What's the difference if you're paying money
Yeah,
for a tool,
exactly.
or
Yeah,
potentially you're
either
still
it's not
getting?
incremental and you've saved that money, or it is
Yeah,
incremental, in which case now you can increase your budget, right, and catch
exactly.
up. So, yeah, no, I mean
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I liked to work with startups with my agency, even though like purely rationally it was a terrible idea because startups like don't have that much money, and when they need everything yesterday. And they demand a lot more than enterprise clients do. I still loved working with them because they were much bolder in terms of experimentation. I think like Paul Graham, the founder of YC, has this great quote where he's like, "A startup is a business in search of a company in search of a business model." Right?
Right.
And I always kind of like that. I always like that vision or that kind of concept because I feel like that search never stops, right? Like you like your what you have as your brand is like what's working right now. Like what you have as your business model is what's working right now. And if you look at the companies that have really endured over time, they're doing very very different things now to what they did originally. So I really like that analogy because if you kind of position company building as a search problem, then you should always be testing, right? You should always be, analyzing because even if you found something works for the past 50 years, this might be the year that it stops working, right? With because AI has made it easier or something,
Oh yeah,
so yeah,
I
like
wish we
it's
could go
yeah.
down that rabbit hole, but
Yeah, we don't have another like 2 days to talk about this,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Actually, I
exactly.
spent a whole day last week just reading about AI because I had like hundreds of emails I'd emailed myself of like things to read, and I'm
Yeah,
like, oh man, like I'm pretty sure in 6 months I'm going to be spending 2 days a week just reading, and then it'll be 4 days a week 6 months after that, and
oh,
eventually
no
it'll just
kidding,
be
man.
I'm going to have to train the AI to do the reading for me. I think
Well, and,
that's
and
the
it
only way.
will, and it will,
Yeah.
and then it'll come up with tasks that it will be able to complete, like Auto GPT. I'm sure you've seen
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's just
yeah. It's another
amazing.
one of my list of like things that I really, really am desperate to try out, but like haven't had the time.
Yeah, yeah. You're too busy doing crazy podcasts like this, and we thank you for
Oh
that.
no, no, no. I mean that's the other thing that you learn in marketing that I think one of the big myths that perpetuates with executives is that like build it and they will come.
Yeah,
And like I'm a big believer that actually like perception is at least 50% of reality, right? If nobody hears about what you're doing, then they're not gonna find you, right?
yeah,
You kind of have to go out there and talk about it. I also found like things like this actually help me build a better product. If you kind of think about my book like a product, I actually, after a couple of the podcast interviews I've done, I've actually like, gone back and rewritten parts of my book because I'm like, no, I actually like the way I explained it on the podcast better than the way
nice.
I read it before. Because I feel like we are social animals, right? Like we're much better at coming up with interesting ideas when you're like face to face with someone or even online. then you are like just staring at Microsoft Word or whatever. So I think it's I think it's a myth that like you can build if you make your product good enough that like it will market itself. But I also think it's the other myth is that like the way you do marketing won't change the product, right? Like the way you do the marketing actually really changes the product, and you can adapt and kind of make the product more responsive to what people actually want.
Definitely. Well, we're getting close to the end here, so I'm
Yeah.
going to ask actually really quickly before the last question, the next to last question. Um,
Okay.
it's Are there any other really fun projects that you're working on now, or blog posts, or any kind of things that you have in the works that you're excited about?
Yeah. So right now I'm working on this big database, which we talked about just before we hopped on. I'm doing this for Recast as part of my work for them. But we thought it would be a good idea to basically document all of the different case studies online of like how brands are measuring marketing. So all of the people talking about MMM, like how they do MMM, what type of MMM they use, like is it Bayesian or whatever. We're also digging through all the kind of conversion lift studies. So there's a bunch of them out there of like people talking about geo tests and how they do them and like what's good, what's bad. And then there's also there's also the multi-touch attribution side. So like, what are people doing? Are they building custom models? Are they using amplitude? Whatever. So we're trying to build this big database and then kind of write up the patterns that we've seen. So like that's been taking up a lot of time. Because it's manual work to do that, but once it's done, I feel like it's going to be a pretty good repository for knowledge. I actually had no idea even doing it, like how many of these companies are using all three connected together, which is something that like I've always told people to do, but I had no idea there were so many examples of people doing it. So
Oh,
they kind of call it like triangulation, right? Like you
yeah,
triangulate the truth based on those three different methods. So I feel like that's like kind of the big trend that I'm seeing emerging.
yeah. I'm so looking forward to that coming out, and it might be out by the time this episode airs. We'll have to wait and see. Is it soon
Yeah,
to be
potentially.
released?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it might be in the next couple of months because we were going
Okay,
to release ourselves, but there's an opportunity to do it as a guest post in a big publication. So, so we'll see.
awesome.
It's not fully confirmed yet, but yeah, if that's the case, then it'll be in the next couple of months.
All right. Well, we'll wait for that and eagerly promote that as soon as that comes out. I'm sure that's going to be a fantastic resource because case studies in these areas are kind of hard to come by. Case studies that are actually informative. It's usually
Yes.
plenty
Yeah.
of the marketing fluff on agency websites. We helped company increase the revenue by 27% with MMM. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
really? How did you measure
I
that?
know. I know. Yeah. But actually, like if you take them in, if like this is another kind of I guess plug for meme mapping, right? But like if you read like one or two of these case studies, you don't learn that much. But if you see in aggregate like hundreds of case studies, you start to think, okay, like I have a pretty clear picture in my head of like what successful people are doing now. And you can choose whether to copy that, or you could choose whether to depart from that and do something better. But like knowing, like seeing that map in front of you gives you a better sense of like where to head, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I like to end the podcast with an action item. One thing
Okay.
that marketers and analysts listening can do immediately after leaving a rating and review for the show, of course. Uh, so, what would you tell the listeners is one thing they should do right now to improve their craft?
Okay, cool. And we're talking more on the measurement side, do you think, or the creative side, like for your listeners?
Yeah, we could take it either way. I think we have a little bit of both listening. So,
Okay, cool. So let's say measurement, right? Like I talked a lot about creative here. So I would say go and literally just turn off advertising in 5 US states at random, right? And there are more scientific ways to do this, right? But just go and do it and ask for forgiveness afterwards. You're going to see a pretty clear picture of whether advertising is working for you. And there's all sorts of more sophisticated statistical things you can do. You can do that, either as part of this experiment or afterwards. But I think most people never actually take action to do measurement, right? Like they try and find the answer in the existing data they have. And my big belief is that you got to go out and create that data by like pulling dials and turning knobs and switching things on and off. So like go out there and start causing chaos, and that's going to create a lot of variance, and you're going to see in that variance what the real truth is.
I love it. And anyone who's listening who takes action on this item and turns off their advertising, if they get angry emails from their boss, you can just blame me.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm on Twitter. Yeah, it's hammer underscore mt. Feel free to tweet at me. I'm always happy to engage in a fiery political discussion.
awesome.
So feel free. I love to argue on Twitter.
Perfect. So yeah, at hammer underscore MT. Where else can people find you? You could
Yeah, so my
plug
my
your
book is
courses and yeah,
marketingmemetics.com, and then vexpower.com is the training platform where you kind of learn how to do more of the measurement stuff.
absolutely. And I know we didn't really talk a whole lot about Vexpower, but I want to let everyone know it's a fantastic resource. I've mentioned it many times in the newsletter, and I've gone through several of the courses myself, and really recommend anyone who's looking to kind of learn the just-in-time training on the job training. It's a great resource to go to. So definitely visit vexpower.com for that. And
Yeah, I appreciate
Mike,
it.
thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and having a chat with us and sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like anytime.
All right. Until next time.